everybody, back to another iteration of Let's Take 5, the podcast where we look at one of the greats of cinema and we discuss their excellence and range. My name is Ray Martindale.
I'm Austin Luger.
But today we're not really doing that. We bend the rules slightly, but did not break the rules, and we are starting off a new 5 of this, well, I was going to say this month, but it's 5, so it's more than a month, with superhero movies. The movies we are covering on this 5 are Superman, Batman, The Dark Knight, Captain America Civil War, and then we're wrapping up this 5 with Logan. So, let's get it started off. We picked Superman because this is the movie that, the first really big-budget superhero movie, the first of its kind, came out in the 70s. It stars Christopher Reeve, Marlon Brando, also stars Gene Hackman. Yeah, we're gonna talk a lot about him, I have a feeling.
Oh, yeah.
And it's actually, I think people forget about this movie, probably because it came out so long ago, and it's Superman, and I think Superman bores a lot of people, quite frankly. But it's a movie that takes place on this planet called Krypton. Krypton's getting destroyed. Krypton, excuse me. They're leaving there, and Superman gets sent off as a baby, and then he lands on an Iowa farm, I believe, and he grows... I think
it's Kansas?
Kansas. I might be confusing him with Kirk, Captain Kirk from Star Trek. That might be Iowa.
Okay,
I'm crossing my nerdy things.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he grows up on this family farm, and then he's Superman. Everyone knows the story. So, Austin, normally when we start podcast, I have an opinion. I know what your opinion is of a film, and since I picked this 5, I'm actually kind of nervous about this because it's kind of funny because the last film that we covered in our 50th podcast was Boyhood. Here in the 51st, the feeling is now right back at you. I have absolutely no idea how you feel about this film.
I think I got that over the past week because I think you kept trying to subtly ask me, and I finished it again last night. And I just want to say early on that with this 5, we're not only kind of covering these 5 superhero films, but we're also looking at their eras. These are 5 movies that also have 5 distinct cinematic eras. So I'm very curious now to talk about. I don't know how we're going to fit this in a half hour, but the film Superman, Christopher Reeve's Superman collection, and then also Superman as the character. And I find all of those to be really interesting. And this film is a film that I actually was surprised I didn't like very much this time, but I also have no negative feelings towards the film. So it's actually kind of a very I'm super neutral. I'm perfect super neutral.
Super neutral.
That's my lame superhero. But okay. I'm very happy to be content because I think there's some really kind of great moments in this, and a bunch of moments that didn't work for me, but those moments didn't hurt it for me.
That's kind of exactly how I felt about the film, too. I love this movie as a kid. I actually like Superman 2 more as a kid.
My memory of that is stronger. I liked that one, but I've only seen those 2 of this 4-film era.
Okay, all right. Well, that's good.
People have actively told me never to watch the 3rd or 4th film, which we'll get to.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So, Superman, I grew up watching the 50s serial, the show, a little bit.
Okay.
I think it was 50s. Because it would play... We didn't have cable as kids. So, when we were really young. And so we had 4 channels, and daytime TV would play reruns of the old Superman show. So I'd watch that all the time with my dad or whatever. And I remember watching it. And Superman was actually the first superhero I was exposed to. I'm an enormous Batman fan. He was the first one that sort of caught with me when I was 4 years old. So I watched Superman, and then from there watched the movie. And I as a child, I remember this film a lot more fondly than I did now on the rewatch. Basically, it's the tale of 2 stories for me. The first half of this film, where you have the Marlon Brando, you have his mother on Krypton, and you see them as a baby, and they send him off, and all that other stuff, is all excellent. The movie starts to lose its sort of momentum when Gene Hackman starts to play a bigger role in the film. Lex Luthor sucks in this movie.
He weirdly does, and it was kind of strange to watch my false memory fade away because, I remember a few scenes from this movie, and one of which was when Lex Luthor kind of tells his plan to Superman. Basically, he's in his office and goes check out how powerful I am. And my memory of it was a super nice skyscraper like office building in New York.
Yeah.
Not this kind of weird tacky looking building that's hidden under a subway.
Underground, yeah.
And that moment means something because, as we're going to look at all these films, if you had these heroes, they need to be fighting for something. So what they're fighting against needs to matter for the basic story, because these are characters actively looking for something to defeat, to maintain order and justice. And there's a really cool villainous death in this movie when you have, this the bad guy kind of going down to the subway, and he goes to this little alcove. Little thing. And he kind of waits for this train to pass by him, and while he does that, the bat goes out and he goes into the secret lair. The good guy following him goes, okay, now I got him. Tries to do the same thing, but it won't go back. And in fact, it starts moving forward, and he gets thrown in front of the train. It's a really cool sequence, really creepy. And then you see, like, oh, this was done by the bad guy. And you see the back of him, and then he turns his chair, and it's Gene Hackman in a really cheap, bad suit. You're like, it immediately lost the devil-ish of it all. Like, a dork did this.
Yeah. That's kind of my whole thing, is that, this was made in the 70s. It's a Superman movie. This is kind of why we're covering the film. It's before comic book movies certainly were taken as seriously as they are now, if not, seriously at all. And granted, I know this movie was nominated for some Oscars, but Gene Hackman was probably playing at a cartoon maniacal type of villain here.
Oh,
there was probably
he treated it as a comedy,
right? Exactly, and there's probably no pulling him away from that. You know what I mean?
And he's trying to make a good comedy. Like in his mind, he's making like
he seems like a Rocky and Bullwinkle character.
Yeah, it's a Mad World kind of thing.
Yeah,
where he's like ridiculous goons, and that's fine for a certain film. And this film, to me, succeeds in where Superman succeeds as a character. Where, he says in this film, why are you doing this? I'm trying to help truth, justice in the American way. He's just saying that. I'm actively deciding to spend my life to do that. Mm. I am a symbol of good. And this is a movie in a world where that kind of works. Like, they can laugh a little bit at that, but they also genuinely believe it. Lex Luthor in this movie is someone who is openly saying, I want to pull off the world's greatest criminal act. He says, I am a criminal. Superman says, I am the good guy. We live in a world of good versus evil. And it's a more nuanced take on it than the old radio serials and perhaps some of the early comic books. But it's still in that kind of very idealistic world where I even noticed in this film that nighttime isn't a threatening time. Whereas in Batman, all his films, that is when
he comes out.
He comes out. It's the darkness. Is it bad? In this film, you get mugged at 3 p.m. You get mugged in complete daylight. Right. It's not scary, but because at night it's not scary. That's when you can be romantic. That's when you can fly up with the stars. It's a happier world that still needs to be defended, and that part of the film worked for me.
I agree.
Most of the story didn't.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
Yeah, so that's what's really curious about this thing.
It is. I'm of two minds about the film. I will say this: I'm really impressed at the idea that this being a superhero movie in the 70s that isn't afraid to be romantic.
Very romantic. Yes, actually. She monologues about Superman in a way of like romance novels.
Right. And most of their time to get spent together when that's the point, that's the focus point. Either when he's Clark Kent or when he is Superman, that all seems to work fairly well. And I love the scene where they fly over the stars together.
That's amazing.
It's fantastic. And the movie actually takes the time to do things like that I think are really impressive. Another thing that really impresses me about this movie is some of the sets are fantastic.
Yeah, that's what... So I don't love the prologue as much as you do.
Okay.
Partly because I couldn't follow it completely.
Okay.
But the sets, the look, the everything is an era where they're committing to it. They're committing to it in such a kind of grand way. I mean, This is 1 year after Star Wars, so you have John Williams 1 year after Star Wars.
Doing the same score.
Yes.
It's very similar.
It's similar, but also wonderful. And, yeah, I mean, they're taking it seriously. I mean, those former... It was a different Reeve. Who played the earlier Superman?
I don't remember.
Ben Affleck in Hollywoodland.
Yeah.
Which was a fine movie that I sort of remember. But, like, it's not being cheap with it. The Oscar it won was a special achievement for visual effects. Like, this is a studio really committing to something that was not considered great art, and yet they got 2 Oscar-winning actors who were 2 of the most beloved guys of their time. They are putting the 2 leads and 2 unknowns who I think nail it, and they get John Williams the year after Star Wars. I mean, it looks like people who care. Mm-hmm. When the Fortress of Solitude, which is not really used in this film, is made, that means something, and that creation is it's a moment of cinema where if this is your first time learning what that is, it now means something for you, which is what it did for me as a kid because I'd never read any of the comics,
right,
and still barely have.
Yeah, no, the movie itself, it's almost kind of hard to talk about because it is. There's just peaks and valleys of this film. It's overlong. That's another thing. 2.5 hours. Yeah, way too long. Way too long for what the movie was, and what I mean, the movie starts to feel long towards the end a little bit. The villain's plan is just weird. Like I'm gonna do, but then it's like it's romantic too, and Clark Kent's cool, and then seeing him grow up's cool, and the stuff at the beginning's cool, but then it's like I don't know. It just seems it's a weird duality where it's kind of like a mishmash of all that's kind of good that will come later, and a lot of the bad that sort of comes later too, like the uninteresting villain that doesn't really affect the plot, Marvel. But that happens a lot, and you see that happen a lot, and then the plan is just like world domination. It's never more nuanced than that.
Well, the weird nuance is that like it's so hysterically corporate adult, like in a way where like kids know what the bad guy is. It's a real estate plan. There are explosions to lead to a real estate scam. Is the big scam?
Yeah, I mean he's going to blow up California. So, basically the plan is to blow up California on the fault line, so then it moves away, and then he now owns beachfront property because he bought up all the stuff in the desert that's worth nothing. That's the plan.
Assuming he doesn't go to jail.
And that's always my whole funny thing about this too. Is it's like, what does money matter if you're? I mean, like at this point, just hold people up for money.
I'm no economist, but I feel that like the U.S. dollar might not be great after we lose a state,
especially California.
The big one.
I want to talk about Christopher Reeve in this film. I believe this was his first film, or it was one of his earliest films.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He picked this film, and the reason what attracted him to it was the fact that he could play 2 different characters in it. That said, Christopher Reeve does an excellent job of playing a Clark Kent, which is very, very different than Superman. That's really important. You see it with Michael Keaton in Batman. He does that really well. It's something that they always try to do with Batman in general. Superman, for some reason, we sort of forget about that. But I've always thought, Superman doesn't wear a mask. Like, it's obvious to see that he's Clark Kent. But when you have someone play it as well as Christopher Reeve does, it really was, to me, felt like 2 very different people.
It did, and it was really, really fun to watch because the idea of Superman and Clark Kent, and it's been said 1,000 times, so I'm not being original, but like Clark Kent is his alter ego.
Yes.
He is an alien who is Superman in comparison to humans because he can fly and do everything, and it's awesome. So typically the kind of alter ego leads to so much angst for superheroes because like they have to keep a secret, his secret can be found out and whatnot. If his secret's found out, I mean, he's Superman. He's just making things a little bit easier for everybody and kind of like be at the ground level. It's just a great act of humility is what he's doing. In fact, he's not even being the show-off in the office. He's the dork who kind of keeps running into things, which is a great cover. And there's one moment where Christopher Reeve gets to brag about how good he is, and it's when he's about to go out with Lois Lane, and she's waiting, and like he's considering telling her, and you see him change his posture and take off his glasses, and it's as if you're watching a visual effect, because he becomes Superman, and then he kind of changes his mind, and then he kind of slouches back down and puts his glasses on, and he just looks like a different actor.
He just nails it. And that, to me, like, is sort of the dividing line between when this is a great film and then when it sort of isn't. Because I really love the first half, which I've already stated, which sort of climaxes with Clark showing up, well, Superman showing up and then flying Lois Lane over the city, and then from then on out, less so. Lois Lane gets in way too much trouble in this film.
Well,
her life is saved 2 different times, one in a helicopter like crash thing, which is just
well, the thing is, like it's her fault, and that's what's confusing me. It's like maybe don't write about his weaknesses in the paper, or maybe don't conduct a interview with a tape recorder and a microphone while you're driving.
Yeah, or like what's she doing out in New Mexico anyway?
Yeah,
they work for Metropolis, which is a stand-in for New York.
Also, when they're being mugged, she kicks the guy. She gets shot. He blocks the bullet. Like, her whole game plan to get her being mugged would have killed her.
It's just, so, like, there's stuff like that it gets a little too
and yet the actress is kind of great.
No, she's great, too, and everyone's really believable.
Margot Kidder, right?
Yes, and Marlon Brando's, of course, great in this as well. And then this had, so this is what's really weird is, I don't have much else to say about the movie, frankly. But, I mean, it's good. It's good. It's a good movie. Most of the movie doesn't work, but it's delightfully doesn't work. It kind of walks off the cliff in like kind of a charming way. But see, what's the weirdest thing about the whole history and lineage of the Superman movies is because you have Superman 2, Superman 3, and then Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Then you have Superman Returns, which
2006. Now.
2006.
This is a whole new era. It's Bryan Singer in the middle of his X-Men run.
Right, but it's not a whole new era in the sense... Well, it's a whole new era as far as film is concerned, but that movie is Superman 3.
Oh, is it?
I believe so. I believe what they did was they pretended Superman 3 and 4 didn't exist.
Trying to do a thing.
And Superman Returns is the sequel to 2.
Okay.
It's weird.
I've seen Returns. I've not seen 3 and 4. 3... Well, actually, Returns is curious, because, like... So I've seen half of this era that we're covering right now. And the thing that I just keep thinking about is the sincerity. And a lot of it is kind of driven through the filmmaking. A lot of it's driven through Christopher Reeve, because, like, you have to be sincere when you're talking about a really earnest Superman film, because it goes towards something that, like... It's something nice and good, and with the wrong lens, it's either phony or bullshit. And it's hard to find that balance when you have a Jesus-like superhero. And Superman Returns isn't a terrible film, but I didn't think it couldn't figure out how to make that sincere. It was trying to be a false era. It felt like a copy of a copy of a copy of a Capra film. And it didn't feel like it had its own Capra film in it. Whereas this, like, it works, and it still works in a complicated nature, because even the way that the film talks about justice, it recognizes gray areas while still wanting to believe in this red and blue idol in the sky.
Well, I think that's the key to making a great Superman, is that Superman needs to be bright and colorful. And if that exposes some type of hypocrisy, or some type of, he's allowed to be black and white, and that's to a fault, and that's what makes him interesting. That's the problem with, like, the Man of Steel films and the Zack Snyder films, which are, well, I haven't seen them either, but I started to watch Man of Steel, and it's just dreadful. But is that you get into this darkness and this macabre thing, which that doesn't work for Superman necessarily. There's nothing, the questions I should be pondering in a Superman film are existential questions. Like, what does the existence of a Superman mean? Is it right that Superman can have X-ray vision and see these things? Is it right that Superman can, that someone can be on this planet and have that much power? That's interesting in its own regards, but, you know, it's not always about, like, explosions and darkness and grittiness and, like, nastiness, which is what I think DC has sort of fallen into now, from what I can tell. And I'm certainly no expert on those films, but I don't know. I just feel like Superman is interesting that way. Like, I think Superman would be very interesting, like an interesting scene with Superman. And I've talked with other friends about this before. Is if and he talked about Bo about this before. He was a guest on the Clockwork Orange podcast. But wouldn't it be something if the struggle in the Superman movie was that Superman wanted to have, that Clark Kent wanted to have a life?
Isn't that Superman too?
Well, kind of. But what I mean is...
He gives up his power.
He gives up... Right. But what I mean is, like... Well, that's... Yeah, but that's kind of... What if Superman... He can hear everything, right? What if he hears a mugging going on? And he shuts the window. Just once. Mm-hmm. What does that mean for Superman? How does that change our idea of Superman? How does it challenge that? That, I think, is an interesting way to do it. But it's always kryptonite. That's what it always is. That's how we
don't understand why that... Whatever. I really don't understand most mythology.
Find another kryptonite, is what I'm saying. Find something else to throw in his face. Try to beat him on an idealistic level.
And I think that works within apparently the successful films of this era, because even though the conclusion of Lex Luthor has 2 rockets is ultimately pretty boring, it gets to that moment where he decided to essentially break reality, turn back the world, and save someone he cares about. And you see him get really upset. And one of the things that the recording of his father kept on saying, you shouldn't interfere with the history of humanity. And that's already a confusing phrase. But this one is very literal violation of that. And you see him that's when he's the most conflicted the entire time. Like, he always knows Lex Luthor is wrong. He's never being tempted by, oh, maybe this is a good land deal. The moments of kind of moral confusion and then decisions are that. And early on, when you have Marlon Brando as his father, they sentence Terrence Stamp and some other dudes to the Phantom Zone, which I thought was really interesting, considering the planet's blowing up soon. So, like...
Yeah, but did they know that then?
I thought they might have.
I think Marlon Brando's character does.
But he's like
Jor-El.
He's the one condemning them. So, like, essentially, you're like, I could leave them here to die, or I can be true to my idea of justice and carry out this sentence, which will still put them in this weird glass purgatory, but they don't burn on this planet. Like, those elements are kind of what makes Superman stories interesting, of like, how far is the right thing? And the scary Superman story is the non-Superman story, which is Watchmen.
Yes.
Which is the commentary on Superman, which is
better than Superman.
Yeah, well, I mean, Watchmen's a perfect story.
Yeah.
But the idea where Dr. Manhattan, the Superman-like creature in that, is all-powerful, even more godlike than this one, and what happens when he stops agreeing with us.
Right.
And what does that mean?
Right. Who watches the Watchmen?
Watchmen. So, I have not seen the third and fourth film, and I have to kind of know what made them... Where did they go wrong?
Well, first of all, I can't speak with any authority on these because I haven't seen them since I was children. The third film is a Richard Pryor buddy comedy.
Bold.
And that one is not as hated as much as the fourth one, which is Quest for Peace, which as a child I actually liked Quest for Peace. It's not a buddy movie with Richard Pryor, you know, like that's the one that made the clearest like break from what came before. But to be honest, I can't speak with any authority.
Were they silly, or were they so sincere? I mean, like
no, they stopped being sincere. That was the thing. I think Superman Quest for Peace was more of a parody of some kind I'm talking my ass, just to be clear. But as a child, it didn't seem that way. And Superman Richard Pryor film, yeah, that was a joke. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, if I did for just like general, like people do, I looked on IMDb and just noticed like the break, like because it's like Superman's like 7.5, Superman 2 is like 6.97. And then Superman 3 is like a 3.4. And then Quest for Peace is like a 2.8. So
I feel that, like...
That's 2.8 is very low on IMDb. That's very low.
And they made a Supergirl movie, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I saw that on TV. Like,
yeah, I don't know.
I vaguely remember.
It's hard for me to talk about. Again, Superman was never my favorite superhero growing up.
It faded. And obviously it's going to lead the way for our next film. But, like... This was the big studio, like, thing, whereas a lot of these ended up being on TV. Especially at a time when TV was not considered high art. And it's like, okay, yeah, well, the Wonder Woman TV show, of the Incredible Hulk TV show, well, you know, Batman 60s, you know. That's where these kind of characters go. This was just a really curious exception.
And I think it's because it's Superman. He was the most, at the time this is made, he's the most popular superhero.
Yeah, highest selling comics by far.
Yeah, not even close.
Yeah.
And he had his show, the show was pretty cool as a kid, you know.
Never seen it.
Yeah. I think it was from the 50s. I'm pretty sure it was, but...
50 sounds right.
Yeah. It's old black and white. It was fun. Faster than a speeding bullet, you know. Like
well, I mean, he stopped the Nazis in a radio serial. That's pretty cool.
Did he?
Yeah. It's a Freakonomics story.
Well, then The Watchmen clearly plays against that one whenever Dr. Manhattan's intervention in Vietnam.
Yeah, because that was the thing. It was like when Nazis were like, still around. Like basically, they kind of were making these like anti-Nazi Superman serials, put them out there, and like where kids go, yeah, Nazis are bad.
Yeah,
which I think is a good propaganda.
well, and it's always like for superhero films, for video games, for books, to any type of fiction. Nazis are always the hall pass. They're always the other human beings that we can murder without any feelings of guilt.
Sure,
they're like really easy bad guys. And naturally so. No. But it's like the one thing that we can all universally agree on is that, oh yeah, Nazis were bad. So when Indiana Jones murders a ton of them, that's fun.
Yeah.
You never question that. So,
especially since I'm not expert on the creation of Superman, but it was made by a young Jewish boy in 30s. It's a good figure to create.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
So as a character who, as storytelling keeps going on, he's sometimes always more symbol than man. This is, again, not a big fan of it, but it's a good symbol movie.
It is. I wish. I don't know if Superman is kind of stuck in a rut because of what the nature of Superman actually is and what he stands for. Like, he can't evolve with the times, or he's just never really had a proper treatment. I mean, as far as that goes, this is the best Superman movie.
Yeah.
And the fact that it came out,
Well, actually, I probably Superman 2 more, but I need to watch it again to see if I...
Right. I mean, I'm kind of the same way, too, and I kind of remember it as a kid, but I think more universally accepted as the best Superman movies of this one, and, it's 40 years ago. That's kind of a shame.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was the TV show Smallville, which I saw the pilot of and thought it was terrible.
Will and Grace, too.
Will and Grace? What are you talking
about? Will and Grace? Well, not Will and Grace. Clark. Lois and Clark.
Lois and Clark, yes. I remember seeing a little
bit of that to the blooper reel.
Okay.
Will and Grace!
I didn't know they had a whole Superman subplot. Where Jack became Superman. But yeah, there's that, and right now there's the Supergirl TV show, which I watched a little bit of, but then there's just... Well, first
Lois and Clark. I said Lewis and Clark. Oh, jeez. Go ahead.
I sadly knew what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But Superman's now on that, apparently, occasionally. But at least, I kind of stopped watching them. The CW, DC comic book shows, when they're good, The Flash and Supergirl have that spirit of fun and, joyful symbols that, the show needs to remember is its strong suit.
Yeah.
And not have, Barry crying over his dead mom after he traveled back in time for the 10th time.
Yeah, the first season of Flash was a lot of fun. First season of Green Arrow, or Arrow, was fun. Second season of Arrow was, I thought, great. Then, holy shit, it really went downhill from there.
Yeah. I think it's time to wrap it up now.
Did we even talk about Superman?
A lot.
Okay.
Like a half hour.
That went quick.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a lot about superheroes.
Oh, yeah, these are going to go long. All right, so that is the first episode of our Super 5. That's why I have my notes of what these are called.
Yeah.
We'll see if that phrase sticks for the whole month and change. But next week, we'll be back for Batman 89. Until then, you can go to theartofmortal.com. Let us know what you think of Superman as a character, as a movie, as a film era. Let us know what you think. Leave a comment on this page. Also, while you're there, you can check out the other podcasts, including the Immortals. Yesterday's episode, we reviewed things like Children of Paradise, Bitches Brew, and The Waltons. That's what happens when we do a random number generator. This month's episode of Ad Absurdum is about Gattaca, which that episode was eerie about how much is true in today's society. There are a lot of laws about that. And also, you can follow us on Twitter at The Immortals Pod. When new episodes come out, Let's Take 5 at theartofmortal.com is our email address. And Eric, where can we find you?
You can find me at Constant Diversion. That's my YouTube channel. Check me out on there.
And I just want to end this episode by saying, Mario Puzo wrote this?
Oh, yeah, I forgot. The guy that wrote The Godfather.
Yeah, I was watching the opening credits going, are there two Mario Puzos?
Hey, fun fact, he started out writing comic books for Marvel before he wrote Godfather.
I did not know that.
Yes, and Stan Lee told him he'd be better off writing books because he wrote too much. So there you go.
So
there you have it.
That's bizarre. All right. Until next time, I'm Austin Luger.
My name's Eric Martindale.
Bye, everyone.
Birdman sucks.
The hell's that?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me. Who's got you? I can't believe it. I just cannot believe it. He got her.